Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to a complete Jing Yuan guide. Jing Yuan is the second rate up banner in Honkai Star Rail, and he is an insane erudition carry who's made for area of effect AoE damage, but is also surprisingly strong in single target because of how his Lightning Lord works, which we'll cover in this video, alongside talking about not just his power level and how to play him, but also his best build, both light cone and relic wise, best Eidolons, best teams, and just everything you need to know about this new character. He is someone who I really love, and I'm really excited to talk to you about, as I have been researching a lot about him from what we knew at the time in the beta, and now also having played him on the Asia server release. And so with that said, I do first want you guys to know that I stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. And with that being said, let's get right into it. All right, so starting things off, let's talk about Jing Yuan and what makes him so special as a strong damage dealing character. Starting things off, the central part of Jing Yuan's kit is going to be this Lightning Lord that attacks alongside of him. This is a passive talent he has where there will effectively be a sort of additional character attacking alongside your Jing Yuan. The Lightning Lord is summoned at the start of the battle and starts with 60 base speed and 3 base attack counts, and then as you cast your skill and ultimate on your Jing Yuan, he will passively increase stacks, gain some speed, and gain some damage, all the way up until it's his turn to take action, and the Lightning Lord will strike, with its attacks being considered follow-up attack damage. And it's also worth noting that the Lightning Lord's damage will scale up with your Jing Yuan stats, and his attacks can crit as well, which means that obviously stacking things like crit and getting good damage buffs will increase not just your Jing Yuan's personal damage, but also your Lightning Lord's, who typically will be the most important part of your kit and your biggest chunk of damage. In fact, the damage he does can actually be good in both single target or AoE. The reason why it can be both is because of how the Lightning Lord's attack actually works. In fact, the way the Lightning Lord works is the following. Every time you use a skill or an ult on Jing Yuan, you will gain either 2 or 3 stacks of your Lightning Lord. His attack count will increase by either 2 for a skill or 3 for an ult, capping out at 10 attacks. And then when it is his turn to strike, he will hit as many times as he has stacks, with damage scaling based on your Jing Yuan's attack. What these strikes actually do is the following. Each strike the Lightning Lord will deal is going to be onto a random target. So every time you strike, he will do as many strikes in quick succession as you have Lightning Lord attack stacks, each strike choosing one random enemy to hit, while also dealing damage to the adjacent ones next to it. And so what happens in practice is that the Lightning Lord will be good at both AoE situations, as you'll be lightning striking a bunch of random enemies, and then each individual strike will also deal 25% of its damage to 2 adjacent targets next to it. Whereas if you're only fighting one enemy, like a boss enemy, every single lightning strike will hit that one enemy, making him also good in single target situations. Jing Yuan is truly versatile, and while he does excel in AoE situations, as each lightning strike will deal additional damage to the adjacent enemies, he can also be good in single target situations to deal with bosses. Now, the way this Lightning Lord works is a bit more complicated. There are a bit more mechanics you need to keep in mind. Like, for example, every single time your Lightning Lord's attack count will increase, he will gain 10 speed. He starts with 60 base speed and 3 base attack counts, and then will stack up an additional 10 speed for every additional attack count past 3. Because of that, his max speed could be 130, and in order to get the most value out of your Lightning Lord's attack, you want to have as many stacks as possible, but especially at least 6. This is because once you reach 6 stacks, one of Jing Yuan's passive traits will increase the Lightning Lord's crit damage for the next turn, making it crucial to have at least 6 stacks on your Lightning Lord. Now, while yes, you can try to aim for 10, sometimes this can be unrealistic depending on your team and what you're fighting. And also keep in mind that while the more attacks you do, the better, it does scale linearly. And even if you're doing 6, 7, or 8 hits and not 10, you still will typically get really good value out of your Jing Yuan. And since your goal is typically to have at least 6 stacks for this crit damage bonus, this means that you can do either 2 skills on your Jing Yuan before your Lightning Lord attacks, or 1 ultimate, or mix and matching like 1 skill, 1 ult, or 2 skills and an ult if you really want to go all out and get 10 stacks. Having a minimum of just 1 ult or 2 skills though makes it pretty realistic for your Jing Yuan to go before your Lightning Lord twice, assuming he has enough speed to lap over him, as your Lightning Lord is just another character in the action bar who will attack when it's his turn. Other good ways to play around this include support characters like Bronya, who make you go instantly, or Asta, who buffs your speed, but we'll talk more about that in the team comp section later. Also keep in mind that the Lightning Lord is unable to take action when Jing Yuan is crowd controlled or when he is knocked down. Other things to note about the Lightning Lord is that since it is the central part of his kit, you want to make sure you're playing around it, building your Jing Yuan adequately, and actually stacking it up to at least 6 or up to 10 so that you can really deal the most damage with it, as the Lightning Lord really does a lot of damage and also gives you a lot of shield break. Every single lightning strike he does can damage the enemy's shield, it can weakness break, although keep in mind that the adjacent targets hit from each lightning strike will not receive any break damage to their shield. Now, for his other abilities, his skill is a pretty straightforward, just AoE lightning damage hit that will hit every enemy and will increase your Lightning Lord's attack count by 2. Your ultimate Lightbringer is a bigger hit of lightning damage, again hitting all enemies, but this time increasing your Lightning Lord's attack count by 3, and it's also a pretty significant part of your damage, so definitely a good ultimate to have alongside your other sources of damage. Jing Yuan's general playstyle, as I said, revolves around stacking his Lightning Lord and spamming your skill as much much as you can, as this will not only give you stacks, but also really good damage since he will typically be your main damage dealer. So you want to make sure you have enough skill points to spam your skill on him and use your ultimate when you can, and then make sure your Lightning Lord is hitting with at least 6 stacks. Other important things to note are that he has a ton of really good traces. You get a ton of crit rate for free, 10% after using your skill, which will last for 2 turns, as well as some bonus crit rate traces for over 20% total. On top of that, he has a trace that gives him 15 energy when he starts a battle, and a technique that will stack up your Lightning Lord, immediately increasing it by 3 at the start of the next battle. And additional information I want to add after playing him even more is that I believe Jing Yuan is an amazing character whenever you need lightning shield break. As I mentioned, the Lightning Lord hits so many times that you will really destroy any enemy that has a lightning weakness, instantly break the shield, stun them, and be able to deal so much damage, both in AoE and also in single target. And I also want to mention that there could be some break effect teams to explore with him in the future, although as of right now, they don't seem to be his general playstyle. Also, for what it's worth, while I believe Jing Yuan is a good unit and is definitely powerful in the Forgotten Hall and Memory of Chaos, again, especially when you need either AoE or lightning shield break, while still being good overall, I believe he's exceptionally broken in the simulated universe, where you could go the elation path, buff your follow-up attack damage, and then get crazy numbers like what you're seeing on screen now, where the total damage is huge. Keep in mind, this wasn't even on my account, with not even maximized supports, only 1 offensive buffing support, so obviously there's even room for improvement here, and he's still performing extremely well, while still being good in content where he doesn't get those buffs, as I said, like the Forgotten Hall as well. And lastly, before getting into the build section, I did want to mention that, as I said earlier, I think Jing Yuan is really strong, a great character, especially in AoE, but can also hold his ground in single target because of how he works. Still really good damage, great for breaking lightning shields, and just a good character overall, but not one who you should feel forced to pull for, as in this game, a lot of the times you're pairing a ton of support characters with 1 or 2 damage dealers, so support characters that are flexible are usually going to be the most valuable to every account. And the next banner is probably going to be Luocha, who is a healer, so if you need that, you can save your gems for that. But having a very versatile and strong carry like Jing Yuan, I think is a good idea, so definitely someone who I would recommend as a strong damage dealer, but not someone who you should feel forced to get if you don't want to. Alright, now with all that out of the way, how do you actually want to build your Jing Yuan? Well, starting things off, for the best light cones for this character, it is no surprise that his signature Before Dawn light cone will be the best one by far for him. This is because you get 36% crit damage on it, as well as an additional 18% skill and ultimate damage on its effect, on top of the fact that your follow-up attack damage will also increase by 48% after using a skill or an ultimate. Because of that, it's just an insane amount of damage and an insane amount of stats overall on this light cone, even at Superimposition level 1. Because of that, you can pull for 1 and use it as the best in slot option on your Jing Yuan. However, I do want to make it clear that while it is definitely the best and a great light cone for erudition characters in general, especially Jing Yuan, there are going to be some other great options, including free-to-play ones, that you can use to where you shouldn't feel forced to pull for a rate-up light cone, even though it is really good. With that in mind, your best free-to-play option is going to be the Seriousness of Breakfast, which you can get and fully superimpose for free in the Forgotten Hall shop. You can talk to the NPC and buy as many copies of this as you like with the currency that you can collect for free. This weapon is great because it increases the wearer's damage by up to 24% if you fully superimpose it, while also increasing your attack every time you defeat an enemy, and it just makes it a pretty consistent and decent light cone. Now, with that in mind, there are some other 4-stars that can potentially be better. Like if you buy the Nameless Honor Battle Pass, you can get Today's Another Peaceful Day, which is a pretty consistently good erudition option for your Jing Yuan. What this does is it will increase your damage based on your max energy, obviously scaling up with your superimposition level, and since Jing Yuan's energy is 130, which is decently high, you will gain anywhere from 26 to 52% damage depending on your superimposition level to just all of your damage, while also having a pretty high base attack of 24 on a 4-star light cone, which makes it a great option if you choose to buy the Nameless Honor. With that said, obviously you can still use the free-to-play option if you choose not to buy it, or choose another light cone. In fact, another light cone I wanted to mention is the Birth of Self, with it potentially even being the best 4-star light cone. Now, generally the Battle Pass one, if you buy it, is more consistent, always will give you 26% damage to your entire kit, whereas the Birth of Self will give you, at superimposition rank 1, 24 to 48% follow-up attack damage, depending on whether or not the enemy is below 50% HP. For Jing Yuan in particular, since his follow attack damage is such an important part of his kit and genuinely like the majority of his damage, this weapon can, as I said, potentially and situationally be your best in slot, at least in terms of the 4-stars, like best 4-star option, especially depending on the content you're doing and the superimposition level of this weapon, whereas the other options, like even the free-to-play one or the Battle Pass one, can be more consistent if that is what you're after. So TLDR, I would recommend this weapon as a more consistent option, not just for Jing Yuan, but also erudition characters in general, whereas Asta's Lycone, the Birth of Self, can sometimes be better and is a just generally good option on Jing Yuan, so keep that in mind when choosing which Lycone to go for. Other Lycones I wanted to mention are, first of all, the Knight on the Milky Way. This is a 5-star Lycone that's on the standard banner, and while in comparison to his signature weapon or other 5-star light cones for other characters, it is pretty underwhelming. It's still a decent option because of the fact that it has a really high base attack and that the effect can situationally be really good, but it is quite inconsistent. What I mean by that is the effect will give you attack for every enemy on the field, 9% at superimposition level 1, stacking up to 5 times. Since Jing Yuan is really good against a lot of enemies while still being fine in single target, as we saw, this can make him excel in those situations by giving him more attack and then increasing his damage by 30% if an enemy is afflicted by weakness break, and this buff will last for 1 turn. Because of that, this weapon has really high potential alongside its high base attack, as I mentioned. However, when I said it was inconsistent, I mean it in the sense that you might not always be able to weakness break enemies, especially bosses and stuff, and then the damage bonus will only be for 1 turn. But if you can set it up and you are playing to break shields and you are fighting multiple enemies to get this attack buff, this weapon does have high potential. So I think people kind of hate on it a bit too hard. Obviously, it isn't the best 5-star light cone, especially when compared to his signature, but as a standard one, it's okay and definitely one that you can use if you can make its effect work, especially when paired with its high base attack. Lastly, if you want a 3-star light cone, I would probably recommend Sagacity for some attack, but overall, I would recommend using 4-star light cones over the 3-star ones for much more damage. Overall, Jing Yuan has some amazing light cone options, one of the best signature weapons we've ever seen, great on like any erudition character, especially Jing Yuan, so I do recommend it, but again, don't feel forced to pull on a weapon banner. You don't need it. It's just nice, but you do not need it because he also has good 4-star light cones, like a great free-to-play option or a good battle pass one, or any of the other 2 light cones that I mentioned. Oh, and lastly, in case you're wondering, you could also use the Genius's Repose weapon, but especially if you don't superimpose this, it's not going to be as good as Seriousness of Breakfast, as this gives you a ton of damage and some attack, whereas this one gives you crit damage, which again is valuable the more you invest into, but it's only for certain turns. It's only after you defeat an enemy, so not generally as good. His free-to-play option is just a really solid 4-star light cone, with there being some upgrades like the ones we talked about earlier. Next up, let's talk about Jing Yuan's best relics. This is going to be an important section to maximize his damage and also the stacks on his Light Lord to just be as efficient as possible. Because of that, let's talk about the best stats you're looking for and also the best relic sets for your Jing Yuan. Starting things off for the sets you want, the standard Thunder set, Band of Sizzling Thunder, is going to be your go-to generally speaking. This is because the 2-piece gives you 10% lightning damage, and then the 4-piece will give you 20% attack when you use your skill, lasting for 1 turn. This attack is great as it will buff all of your damage after using that skill, so if you use your ultimate, or if your Light Lord strikes, or if you use like another skill or whatever while the buff is still active, you will gain a pretty significant amount of stats from using this 4-piece. With that in mind, if you do want to save some stamina or have better substats on another set, you can mix and match 2-pieces, like going for the 2-piece of this lightning set while also going for the 2-piece of the Musketeer of the Wild Wheat for some lightning damage and some attack. You can also, if you're early game and don't have that lightning set, go for the 4-piece of the Musketeer's Wild Wheat just for some speed, but obviously it isn't as good as if you were to go for either mix and matching 2-pieces or especially his best in slot being the 4-piece Band of Sizzling Thunder for just the lightning damage and attack that you are gaining. Keep in mind though that since the difference between this 4-piece set and the 2-piece that I was talking about is only 8% attack, on top of it not buffing your first skill cast to proc the 4-piece set of this Band of Sizzling Thunder, that substats can actually outdo it. And since you can get the Musketeer set by opening chests or 5-star ones from the Echo of War weekly bosses, you may have better substats on them, and it may be more efficient to mix and match 2-pieces than to go for the 4-piece Band of Sizzling Thunder, depending on what you have already, with this 4-piece typically being his best in slot. Lastly, for the other 2-piece, the Planner Ornaments that you get from the Simulated Universe, while there are a few viable options, I think the clear one is the Inert Salsodo, which is a go-to on so many DPS characters as it gives you 8% crit rate and then will also increase your ultimate and follow-up attack damage by 15% when you have 50 crit rate. This is insane because you gain so many stats, and for most characters, just this crit rate and ultimate damage is enough to make it their best option. But with Jing Yuan, since your follow-up attack damage is also very relevant, you're also getting a damage buff to that, which actually matters and makes this a great option and what I typically recommend. With that in mind, if you don't have this set or want to use another one, maybe you have better substats on it, the Space Stealing Station can also be okay for 24% attack when you have 120 speed, although keep in mind, I do not recommend it as much as the Inert Salsodo. Alright, now next up, what stats you want on Jing Yuan? Well, obviously, the main things to increase your damage are going to be crit rate, crit damage, and attack, the 3 main stats to just get the most out of every hit. With that said, it's also very important to have at least a decent amount of speed, because not only is Jing Yuan's base speed of 99 not the highest, it's not that low, but it's not too high, you also want to try to be able to use your skill twice a lot of the time, especially if you don't have your ultimate ready, before your Lightning Lord attacks, so that you can stack him up as much as possible, at least 6 times to get that crit damage bonus, but ideally even more to deal more damage. Because of that, having enough speed or speed buffing supports or characters that let you go instantly, like Asta or Bronya, are going to be essential to maximizing your value. While obviously we'll get into more details in the team comp section where we talk about the best support characters for him, in terms of stats, going for speed on things like your boots and on substats can always be nice to make sure you have enough speed to stack your Lightning Lightning Lord as much as possible before he attacks, as the Lightning Lord's speed scales from 60 to 130 depending on how many stacks he has. Because of that, I recommend the following stats. For your body, you would look for crit rate or crit damage, whichever one you need more of. For your boots, you look for speed or attack. And for more detailed information here, I would recommend speed for consistency, but obviously attack could be better if you don't need the speed, like you have a ton of speed substats, or as I mentioned earlier, enough speed from external sources, supports that can buff it or advance your actions forward. I do like speed, generally speaking, and think it's the safer, more consistent option to make sure you have enough turns both before your enemies and also before the Light Lord. So I typically recommend speed boots for most players, but if you have enough, then attack boots could be more damage, depending on your team, substats, and the content you're clearing. For your sphere, you definitely want a lightning one, as it will give you the most damage. And for your link rope, attack is going to be the general option, although there could be a case to be made for energy regeneration if you want to use your ult more often, but generally speaking, attack rope is what I would recommend for a lot more damage just throughout your entire kit. While energy regen can be viable, I believe losing out on attack rope is a pretty significant loss of DPS, and if you need more energy, you could always run a support character like Jing Yuan, who is featured on his banner, but still, ER rope is viable, attack is recommended, at least in terms of maximizing your DPS, because so much of your kit scales with attack, so you get a lot of value from stacking it. And on all of your substats, you can look for the stats we mentioned, being crit rate and crit damage primarily, but also speed and attack. Moving on, in case you're wondering about Jing Yuan's Eidolons, I want to say that even just at E0, one copy of him, he is really strong and is not dependent on any, but there are a few that are pretty good, with his E1 increasing the adjacent damage of each of the Lightning Lord's attacks, so making him better in AoE, an additional 25% of the damage multiplier, which is effectively doubling it. His E2 will give him 20% damage to his skill, ultimate, and basic attack for 2 turns after your Lightning Lord takes action, so a passive 20% increase to your skill and ultimate, but it does not actually buff your Lightning Lord at all. E3 and 5 increase your trace levels, with E5 in particular buffing your skill and Light Lord's damage, as it also levels your talent. E4 gives you some energy for every hit your Lightning Lord does, and E6 will effectively give you more damage by making the enemy vulnerable when the Lightning Lord hits an enemy, making them take 12% more damage, stacking up to 3 times, and lasting until the end of the Lightning Lord's current turn. This means that it's just a buff, and then the hits after the first, second, and third one will all be dealing more and more damage. So this is the only real Eidolon that will buff your Lightning Lord's damage, whereas the others will buff mostly your skill and ultimate. Overall, pretty decent Eidolons, with his first and second one giving you a bit of damage, especially in AoE with the first one, his fourth one giving you some energy if you need it, and his sixth one just increasing your overall damage. But again, none of them are needed, as he's an amazing character even at E0. Now lastly, for one of the most important sections, we have to talk about Jing Yuan's best teams. Now while in this game, the exact way you build your team will vary heavily on the content you're doing and what you're trying to clear exactly. I'm going to give you guys some general tips to get the most value out of a Jing Yuan team. Starting things off, we have pretty much any of the Harmony supports. Asta is great because she buffs your speed significantly, which means you can attack more often, which is not just good in general, but also helps you stack up your Lightning Lord as much as possible before he attacks. On top of that, Asta gives you attack buffs and just is a pretty good shield breaker, so a great support overall. Jing Yuan and Bronya are also amazing, with Bronya probably being not only the best damage buffing support in the game, but that is also true with Jing Yuan, as she not only will give you a ton of damage through her skill and ult, but will also allow you to move instantly, which means you can, for example, use your skill on Jing Yuan, then use Bronya's skill and go again, so immediately get 2 skills to stack your Lightning Lord very quickly. Lastly, for the Harmony supports, we have Jing Yuan, who also is great for just damage and energy, which means you can spam your ultimate as often as possible, as this energy can be quite valuable. Just keep in mind that you will be playing 2 lightning characters, which has its strengths, like being able to run certain supportive light cones that buff lightning damage, as well as some weaknesses like not having as many different elements on your team for certain types of content. With that in mind, you can also just use generic really strong supports like Pila to reduce defense, Well to slow enemies and increase your damage, defensive supports like the Fire main character, or March depending on what you're trying to do, if you just want more tankiness, or even someone like Japard to allow your Jing Yuan to just hyper carry alongside these supports. Overall, there's a lot of really good options, and generally, I believe that to talk about Jing Yuan's best teams, there are mainly 2 archetypes you can build, and most of which will involve, in my opinion, running him with at least one of the strong Harmony supports I mentioned, being Asta, Bronya, or Jing Yuan, to really help him spam his abilities as often as possible and deal as much damage as possible. All 3 of these characters can either move your action forward, give you speed, or give you energy to ult more often, which are very valuable on this character. Overall, his team formulas though are the following. You're either going to build him as the main damage dealer in your team, which is what most people are going to do, where you pair him with a healer or shielder like Japard, but typically a healer like Natasha or Bailu, or Luocha when he comes out, and then a strong supporting character, with the last slot being very flexible based on the content you're doing. If you need a shield breaker for certain floors of the Forgotten Hall, or a support to increase your damage like Pila, Well, Jing Yuan, whoever, or even a defensive support like a shielder like the Fire main character, these can all be viable options depending on what you're trying to do. This flex slot could also make it a second team archetype, and this is one where you would want more single target damage or another carry of a specific element to help you in certain content, and that is pairing pairing Jing Yuan with a hunt carry. Now keep in mind, Jing Yuan's a character who really does not want a basic attack because you want to spam your skill to stack your lightning lord and deal as much damage as possible. But if you have a skill point efficient team, you can also run a hunt carry to help in single target situations. So pretty much any of them, with Dan Heng being a great free to play option who also slows enemies, or someone like Sealy for some general damage in content where you would want more single target help. This isn't the recommended general playstyle, but it definitely can work when you want more than one damage dealer and have these skill points to afford it, especially in content where there are hard bosses that you really need help clearing. Typically though, most people will run Jing Yuan as the main damage dealer with some supports and sub DPSs to help him along. And overall, your Jing Yuan teams are going to just be very flexible. I just want to emphasize the fact that I think you should run him with a Harmony support, generally speaking, as I mentioned multiple times, because of how much value they give you, increasing your damage and then also giving you other forms of utility. But other than that, your team is super flexible. Play whatever you need, run a healer, run a defensive option, an offensive option, another carry, whatever fits your team, as long as you're skill point efficient and maximizing your damage, with his main synergies being, once again, with these strong supportive characters that we talked about. And so yeah, overall, I really do like Jing Yuan. Not only do I like his design and playstyle, but I think he's a really strong and fun unit who you can get a lot of value out of using, and I hope I did a good job at covering that in this video. If there's anything new I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment, as he is a new character, so there may be some things that I want to change or that I learn in the future, and so be sure to check that for updated information. Don't feel forced to pull this character, but he is someone who I've been enjoying using, and I hope that you will too. Thanks so much for watching. As always, I hope this guide was helpful, and with that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.